were bakers. If someone were to have that number, they would perhaps be fated to be a baker. And they would have skills such as creativity, patience, all things that go with baking, as well as making and designing bread. If it was 9, there would be another occupation that would be associated with it, and so on and so forth. These numbers also represent colors. There are certain colors that these people that utilize numerology should also be aware of and have. There are certain colors. And if they use these colors will also strengthen them, they will benefit them, and they will give them added strength as well. In examining this, one can then see that numerology is a very developed, intricate, and completely patterned system. And the only way that someone can properly do and understand numerology is when people follow it to the letter. Now, how do people use numerology? How do they do it? Numerology is done by abusing a system called alphanumerics. Alphanumerics is where someone takes a particular number. A letter. They take a particular letter. Now, by taking that particular letter, they then assign a number to it, making it the case that that actual letter represents that number. An example would be taking the letter A and assigning to the letter A the numerical quality of 1. Assigning to it the numerical quality of 1. And then B would receive the numerical quality of 2, all the way up until all 26 letters had been assigned a numerical quality. Now, by doing this by itself, this is completely innocuous. It's harmless. Because the ancient nations, in order to do mathematics, used to take letters, assign them numerical qualities, and then add them up. And this is the source of our trigonometry, our algebra, and our geometry. This is completely innocuous. There's no harm in this. But the problem comes is when someone uses this alphanumeric system and then adds up someone's name, designates it a number, and then begins to assign certain properties to that number. Whether those properties have to do with harming or benefit or creativity or wisdom or finding a spouse that someone always desired, these are where the actual alphanumeric system becomes abused and transforms into numerology. This is where the problem comes in. A question that comes to our minds then next is, if this problem is in popular culture, how much has this penetrated Muslim culture? Is numerology a problem amongst Muslims? Is it a situation that Muslims should be concerned about? Our answer to this is yes. Numerology indeed does exist amongst Muslims. However, how and in what form does numerology exist amongst Muslims? How does it exist? What appearance does it take on? How is it used? The system of numerology, as used by Muslims, actually has a history. And we have to talk about that history first before we can fully touch on numerology amongst Muslims. The use of the alphanumeric system in Arabic has a history that is twofold. The first part of this alphanumeric history is that the early Muslims, what they used to do in assigning alphanumeric qualities is rather than have to write out the entire number in Arabic, they would write out the letters that symbolized those numbers alphanumerically. This was also very beneficial in terms of when someone dealt with enemies on the battlefield. Messages, of course, need to be sent from general to general, or from a corporal to a lieutenant. And the best way to do that was through letters at that particular time. However, the danger existed in those letters falling into the hands of the enemy. So what would be the best way to avoid having that happen? Well, what the Muslims did is they used an alphanumeric code. So they would write out their message in an alphanumeric code that, if recovered by the enemy, would be impossible to decipher without knowing the code. Here's the code that they used. The code is called the Abjad system. The Abjad system. And the Abjad system was composed of some 8 different words that abbreviated this alphanumerical pattern. So, for example, the letters Alif, Ba, Jim, and Dal stood for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the word Hawaz stood for Ha, Waw, Zay, and these were alphanumerically represented by the letters 5, 6, and 7, and so on and so forth. This is how these letters were represented. And it was very effective in terms of when you were at war with an enemy that you did not want them to receive military information on your movements or troop deployments or the size of the army or crucial information about reinforcements. However, there is a second dark side to the use of the Arabic alphanumerical numbers. And that dark side was to take them and derive them for numerological purposes. What happened is many people began to associate the actual alphanumerical equivalents that they took from these letters. They began to assume that these alphanumerical equivalents had power, because the Quran had been revealed in Arabic. Therefore, they thought Arabic is a sacred language. Therefore, everything about it, alphanumerically and otherwise, must have some divine quality about it. Therefore, it must be something good to take advantage of the alphanumerical quality of these letters. This is the basic gist of when numerology, when alphanumerics began to be abused and corrupted into numerology. Now, we want to ask, there are some Muslims in distorting alphanumerics into numerology who believe that the numbers in and of themselves have power. And they believe that by not choosing these particular letters, these prime numbers that are represented by the numbers, that divine consequences will come as a result. Let us take an example into our memory banks.